The Super Bowl party at my father's house felt like a casual Friday for the board. Hot wings, cold beer, and the strained smiles of family. When the halftime whistle blew, my stepmother's slap was a clean, illegal tackle, leaving the sting of buffalo sauce on my cheek. My father kept passing wings, oblivious. But right then, I changed the play. Monday morning, in Stonebridge Tower, the second half would be mine. My name is Maeve Rylan. At 31, I am the Director of Risk Management for Meridian Freight, a title that sounds important and is, in reality, a license to be the most paranoid person in any room. Tonight, that room was my father's sprawling living room in Arden Park, a wealthy suburb where the lawns are too green and the smiles are too white. It was Super Bowl Sunday, and the house was a shrine to manufactured enthusiasm. Team flags, a riot of blue and silver, hung from the eaves of the porch and were staked into the manicured lawn like territorial claims. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of slow-cooked chili, beer, and the cloying sweetness of Delia's potpourri, a smell I associated with deceit. The game was on a television the size of a small car. The halftime show a seizure of flashing lights and bass so deep it vibrated through the floorboards. Men in jerseys, friends of my father, Meridian executives, local business owners, were clustered around the screen, their loud commentary a constant, rolling wave of noise. I was clearing away the first half's debris, paper plates smeared with guacamole, empty bottles, crumpled napkins. It was a role I slipped into seamlessly at these functions. The dutiful daughter, tidying the edges of a life I never quite fit into. That's when Delia found me. My stepmother moved through the crowd not like a person, but like an event in herself. She was all polished surfaces, her blonde hair lacquered into a perfect helmet, her teeth a blinding white, her smile calibrated for maximum charm. She wore a cashmere sweater in the home team's silver, a subtle nod of allegiance that cost more than my first car. She looked like a professional hostess, an MC for a life of curated perfection. "Maeve, darling," she cooed, her voice a smooth, practiced melody that never reached her eyes. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch light but proprietary. I could see a faint orange sheen on her fingertips, the ghost of the buffalo wings she'd been serving. She leaned in, her perfume a cloud of expensive florals. "Don't ruin the family image tonight," she whispered, the words a silken thread against my ear. Her smile didn't waver. To anyone watching, we were a portrait of familial affection. I didn't react, didn't pull away. I'd learned long ago that stillness was my best defense against her. I simply stacked another plate. "I wasn't planning on it," I said, my voice even. I paused, my gaze meeting hers. "I just had a quick question about the event budget. There was a line item for Super Bowl marketing that came through without documentation. I just need to attach the invoice for the auditors." The change was instantaneous. It was like a cloud passing over the sun. The socialite smile evaporated, and the warmth in her eyes turned to ice. The pressure on my arm increased, her manicured nails digging slightly into my sleeve. "This is not the time or the place for work, Maeve." "Risk is a 24/7 concern," I replied calmly. "It's a 5-figure expenditure. Delia, it needs a paper trail." Her jaw tightened. "Follow me," she hissed, turning on her heel and gliding toward the kitchen, her movements fluid and elegant, betraying none of the fury simmering beneath the surface. I followed her into the large stainless steel kitchen. It was an industrial-grade space designed for catering, not cooking. The door swung shut behind us, muffling the roar of the party to a dull, distant thrum. The sharp, vinegary smell of the hot sauce warming in a silver chafing dish hung heavy in the air. For a moment, we stood in silence, the only sounds the hum of the oversized refrigerator and the faint echo of a sportscaster's voice from the living room. Delia turned, her face a mask of cold fury. "You think you're clever, don't you? Bringing that up in front of everyone?" "I didn't bring it up in front of anyone," I said, keeping my voice low. "I brought it up with you, privately." "You are always watching, always digging," she spat. "Like a little rat in the walls of this family, of this company." She took a step closer, invading my personal space, forcing me back against the cold steel of a prep counter. She grabbed my chin, her grip surprisingly strong, forcing my head up. "You are a loose end, a compliance issue my husband refuses to deal with." The halftime show crescendoed in the other room, a blast of pyrotechnics and a final, triumphant power chord. In that instant of overwhelming noise, her hand flew. The slap was sharp, precise, and utterly silent against the wall of sound. My head snapped to the side, my cheek exploding with a fiery, stinging pain. The world went white for a second, a bright flash behind my eyes. The acidic scent of vinegar and cayenne from her fingers filled my nostrils. A sickeningly intimate smell. My cheek burned, the skin already feeling tight and hot. The kitchen door swung open. My father, Gavin Rylan, chairman of Meridian Freight, stood there for a half second, a fresh platter of chicken wings in his hands. He was a handsome man, his hair still thick and dark, his face the picture of corporate authority. He glanced at us, at Delia's furious posture, at my hand instinctively rising to my stinging cheek, and his eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Annoyance? Resignation? It certainly wasn't concern. He said nothing. He simply turned, letting the door swing closed, and walked back into the party, a jovial host delivering sustenance to his guests. The sound of his voice boomed cheerfully. "Who's ready for the second half?" The door clicked shut, leaving me in the humming silence of the kitchen with my stepmother. The moment was gone. The opportunity for intervention had passed. He had seen, and he had chosen not to see. Delia released my chin, a look of triumph on her face. She smoothed her perfect sweater. "Now, we are going to go back out there," she said, her voice once again calm and controlled. "And you are going to smile. You are going to be a part of this happy family. Do you understand me?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my mind a sudden, cold void. The pain in my cheek was a grounding force, a focal point in the swirl of shock and rage. She took my silence as acquiescence and swept out of the kitchen, the door swinging gently in her wake. I stood there for a long time, leaning against the counter. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the vinegary air searing my lungs. I could taste the coppery tang of blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. Methodically, I began to run through a checklist, the way I would during a corporate crisis. Assess the damage, contain the situation, document everything. I pushed myself off the counter and walked to the small security hub mounted on the wall near the back door. A tiny red light was blinking steadily. Active. The motion sensor in the kitchen and the camera in the doorbell hub were always on. The system recorded audio and video on a continuous loop, saving clips when motion was detected, the door opening and closing, our movements, the sound. It was all there, stored on a server I had administrative access to. My eyes scanned the room. My training took over. Seeing not a kitchen but a scene, I saw the silver chafing dish, the source of the sauce on her hand. I saw the half-open door she'd exited through. I saw the faint, orange smear on the stainless steel counter where her hand had rested. My purse was on a nearby chair. I walked over and took out a small, sealed wet wipe from a side pocket. I brought it to my face and gently dabbed my cheek. The cool moisture was a relief against the burning skin. But I wasn't seeking comfort. I was collecting a sample. The wipe came away with a faint orange-red stain, a mixture of her expensive foundation, the residue from her hand, and the specific proprietary blend of buffalo sauce from the caterer she'd hired. The exact smell of my assault was now on a disposable cloth. Evidence. I folded the wipe carefully, slipped it into a small plastic zip-top bag I kept for emergencies, a habit from years of unpredictable business travel, and tucked it deep into an inner pocket of my purse. I then pulled down the sleeve of my sweater, making sure the red mark that was probably already forming on my wrist from her grip was covered. I took one more deep breath, centered myself, and composed my face. I walked to the kitchen door, pushed it open, and stepped back into the cacophony of the party. The halftime show was over, and the commentators were analyzing the first half with frantic energy. A few people glanced at me, but their attention was on the screen. My father was laughing at something one of his executives had said. Delia was at the bar, pouring a glass of white wine, the picture of elegance and control. She caught my eye and gave a small, triumphant smirk. I smiled back. It was a thin, brittle thing, but it was a smile. I moved through the room and took a seat on the edge of a sofa, my eyes fixed on the television screen where the teams were retaking the field. "The second half starts now," I murmured to myself. The Vietnamese phrase, a quiet rebellion she wouldn't understand. The second half is starting. But in my mind, the game on the screen had already faded away. I was no longer a spectator. I had the ball, and I was opening my playbook. The first page was titled, Halftime Audit. Meridian Freight is not just a company, it is a brand. Its blue and silver logo, a stylized M that evokes both a wave and a highway, is plastered on thousands of trucks, shipping containers, and warehouses across the country. It's a symbol of efficiency, reliability, and American grit. From its headquarters in the glass and steel Stonebridge Tower in West Hexley, it projects an image of seamless, modern logistics. But like most brands, it's a carefully constructed facade. The logo is a wall, and behind that wall is the messy reality of my father's second act. A marriage to Delia, a woman who didn't just join the family but rebranded it. She wasn't just my stepmother, she was the company's co-CEO, a title created for her, a testament to her ambition and my father's willingness to accommodate it. Delia's magnum opus was the Rylan family brand. She understood that in the modern corporate world, a CEO's personal life was a marketable asset. She built this brand through her pet project, the Playbook Foundation, a charity ostensibly focused on providing sports equipment to underprivileged youth. In reality, it was a high-gloss PR machine. Every check presentation was a photo op. Every charity gala a carefully stage-managed event to showcase the Rylan family's generosity and unity. Delia was always there, perfect and poised, one hand on my father's arm, the other holding an oversized check for the cameras. The foundation's name was a Delia Special, a clever nod to sports that also implied a strategic, winning approach to life. It was all about the playbook, and she was the head coach. I was never part of her starting lineup. I didn't get my office at Meridian Freight through a photo op or a marriage certificate. I earned it. I have the framed charters on my wall to prove it. Chartered financial analyst, certified public accountant. They represent years of my life surrendered to 1,000-page textbooks and grueling 6-hour exams. They represent nights spent sleeping on a couch in my office because I was running financial models on a time-sensitive acquisition, and dawn was a better option than defeat. I came in through the side door, the one marked qualifications, not the front entrance reserved for family. I did this deliberately. I wanted there to be no ambiguity about my position. I was not Maeve Rylan, the chairman's daughter. I was Rylan, CFA, CPA, the director of risk management. My value was quantifiable, written in the cold, hard language of numbers, not the warm, fuzzy dialect of family ties. This, of course, made me a problem for Delia. In her meticulously crafted world of appearances and narratives, I was an inconvenient fact. She couldn't dismiss me as a beneficiary of nepotism, and she couldn't control me. I was a silent threat, not because I coveted her position or my father's affection, but because my job was to scrutinize the very thing she used to build her empire, the flow of money. As director of risk management, every budget, every expense report, every sponsorship deal eventually crossed my desk. I was the guardian of the company's financial integrity, which put me in direct opposition to her role as the guardian of its public image. She built narratives. I deconstructed them with spreadsheets. My father, for his part, operated under a single, unwavering principle: unity. To Gavin Rylan, the family and the company were one and the same. And the greatest threat to both was internal conflict. He believed discord was a private matter, a messy inconvenience to be handled quietly and then erased before the official portrait was taken. He despised any crack in the facade. I remember once, years ago, when I questioned a merger he was pushing through, pointing out the questionable accounting practices of the target company. He didn't debate the facts with me. He just looked at me with weary disappointment and said, "We are a team. Maeve, we present a united front. Always." That was his core belief. The truth was negotiable. The appearance of solidarity was not. It's why he could walk past the kitchen, see the fury on his wife's face and the pain on mine, and choose to deliver a tray of chicken wings. Acknowledging the conflict would have been a violation of his most sacred rule. This belief in unity was the shield Delia operated behind, and for years, she was careful. Her expenses for the Playbook Foundation were always immaculate, the paperwork flawless, but over the last few months, something had changed. She'd grown bolder, or perhaps just sloppier. I first noticed it a month ago. A series of expenditures coded under hospitality and events began to appear in the corporate accounts. They were significant sums, paid out to boutique consulting firms I'd never heard of. On their own, they might have been legitimate, but when I cross-referenced the payment dates, a pattern emerged. Each hospitality payment coincided, to the day, with the signing of a major new container shipping contract out of the port of Long Beach. It was a correlation so precise it couldn't be a coincidence. It was a tell, a faint but distinct signal in the noise of corporate cash flow. It smelled like kickbacks. Around the same time, Delia's email habits changed. She began to CC me on an array of internal communications, mostly related to logistics and scheduling for the foundation. It was a transparent attempt at performing transparency, but frequently, she would mention an attachment, a budget proposal, a vendor contract, that wasn't actually attached to the email. The first time, I thought it was a simple mistake. The second time, I recognized it as a tactic. She was creating a digital paper trail that suggested she was keeping me in the loop, while simultaneously withholding the actual data. It was a way of saying, "See, I'm an open book." While ensuring the most important pages were torn out, it was a classic move, designed to cover her tracks and build a defense of plausible deniability. This was the context for my next move. A week before the Super Bowl party, I sent a formal request through the IT department, CCing Delia and our chief compliance officer. The subject line was deliberately bland. Compliance support request. In the body. I explained that as part of a routine annual review of third-party vendor interactions, my department required temporary read-only access to the Playbook Foundation's event planning and financial servers. I framed it as a procedural necessity, a way to ensure our charitable arm was in full compliance with corporate governance standards. It was a perfectly reasonable, utterly undeniable request. Delia called me less than 10 minutes after I sent it, not an email, which would have left a record, but a direct call to my office line. "Maeve, I just saw your request," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You are just so wonderfully thorough, always looking out for the company." "It's my job." "Delia," I said, my tone flat and professional. "Of course, it is. I'll approve it right away. Anything you need. We have nothing to hide here." She paused, and I could almost hear the gears turning, the calculation behind her words. "It's just such a shame you have to spend your time on these tedious little audits when you have so much talent. I keep telling your father we need to find a role for you that's more visible." It was a veiled offer, a piece of bait. "Stop digging, and I'll give you a promotion. Join the PR team. Be one of us." "I'm happy where I am," I said. "The data is visible enough for me." There was a flicker of cold silence on the line before she recovered. "Well, let me know if you need anything at all. We're a team, after all, a family." She hung up. The smile I couldn't see, I knew, had not reached her eyes. The access was granted an hour later. I spent the next week quietly sifting through the servers in my evenings, after the office had emptied out, and now, sitting here in the aftermath of her slap, the noise of the game washing over me. The pieces were all coming together. My quiet, methodical work had unnerved her. My silence had made her anxious. People like Delia and my father live in a world of words, of speeches and press releases and carefully crafted statements. They don't know how to handle silence. Silence is a vacuum, and their instinct is to fill it, with bluster, with threats, with mistakes. The slap wasn't just an act of anger, it was an act of desperation. It was the sound of a carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. And I, the silent threat, had recorded the noise. Preparation is a form of foresight. In my line of work, you don't just react to risk, you anticipate it. You model the threats, identify the vulnerabilities, and you lay traps. The Super Bowl party, an event ostensibly about family and football, was, to me, a high-risk environment. It was Delia's home turf, a place where her narrative control was absolute. So I had come prepared. An hour before the guests arrived, while the house was still quiet, I'd excused myself to the main floor guest bathroom. In my purse was a small, innocuous-looking vial containing a clear, viscous liquid. It was a non-toxic, skin-safe ultraviolet dye, the kind used in forensic training and escape rooms, odorless, colorless, and invisible to the naked eye. I unscrewed the top of the liquid hand soap dispenser, a fancy ceramic thing filled with some cloying, vanilla-scented soap, and poured the entire contents of the vial in. I gave it a few gentle swirls to mix, then screwed the top back on. The trap was set. My original intention was different. I'd theorized Delia might try to pass off a sensitive document or a cash envelope during the party. The dye was meant to trace the chain of custody. I never imagined its primary use would be to tag my own assailant. Now, sitting on the couch with the game's second half underway, the pain in my cheek a dull, constant throb. My mind was running a post-incident analysis. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Delia, ever the gracious hostess, was circulating, offering a plate of desserts. I watched her every move. I saw it as she reached to hand a miniature cheesecake to one of my father's partners. A faint, almost imperceptible orange smudge on the cuff of her silver cashmere sweater, the buffalo sauce. My heart gave a single, hard thump, confirmation. I waited for a commercial break, then stood and made my way back to the same guest bathroom. I closed and locked the door, plunging the room into the soft, dim light of a single decorative sconce. From my purse, I retrieved 2 items, the plastic baggie containing the stained wet wipe and a small, sleek penlight. I clicked the button on the end of the pen. It didn't emit a normal beam, but a soft, purplish-blue glow, an ultraviolet light. First, I held the light over the wipe. The orange smear from my cheek flared to life, glowing with a ghostly, greenish-yellow luminescence. The dye had transferred perfectly from her hand to my face, and from my face to the wipe. It was a cocktail of evidence: the caterer's sauce, her makeup, my skin cells, and the chemical marker I had planted. My hands were steady as I put the wipe away. I turned to the mirror. The red mark on my cheek was visible even in the dim light, a faint handprint already beginning to bloom into a bruise. I shone the UV light on my face. The glowing trace of her fingers was stark and undeniable. A spectral hand laid against my skin. It was a goal line marker in a game only I knew was being played. She had touched the wings. She had washed her hands. And then she had touched me. The chain of evidence was complete. A direct line from the food to the assault. I slipped the penlight back into my purse and pulled out my phone. I bypassed the lock screen with a glance and opened a sandboxed, encrypted application disguised as a currency converter. It was my private digital journal, a place where I documented every anomaly, every suspicion, every risk related to Meridian and, by extension, my family. My first action was to access the home security system's remote portal. The interface was clean, designed for homeowners, but the data it collected was forensic grade. I navigated to the event log. The timestamps were precise to the millisecond. 19:42:15. Kitchen door. Event, opened. 1942-18, kitchen door. Event, closed. 1943-02, kitchen sensor. Event, audio anomaly detected. Level, 410. An audio anomaly. The system wasn't smart enough to know it was the sound of a hand striking flesh, but its microphone had registered the sharp, percussive spike in decibels. Distinct from the ambient noise of the party, it had logged the impact. I downloaded the 30-second audio clip bracketing the anomaly. It was muffled, dominated by the halftime show from the other room, but the sound was there. Underneath it, if you isolated the frequency, you could hear Delia's hiss, a little rat in the walls. I took a series of screenshots of the logs and the audio file's metadata. Then, I took a clear, high-resolution photo of the evidence bag containing the wipe. I uploaded everything to my secure cloud server, a server domiciled in a country with non-extradition laws. The data was now redundant and untouchable. I created a new entry in the log, dating and timestamping it. I titled it simply, Incident 73, Super Bowl. When I returned to the living room, Delia was laughing. Holding court near the fireplace, I noticed something new. On her right wrist was a thick, modernist bracelet of brushed steel. Something I hadn't seen her wear before. As she gestured with her wine glass, the overhead LED pot lights caught the surface of the metal. My eyes, trained to spot imperfections, caught it immediately. A faint, dull smudge, marring the brushed finish. It was just an inch long, slightly curved, an invisible confession. She had either put the bracelet on after washing her hands, or her hand had brushed against it, leaving a trace of the same sauce, the same invisible dye. To everyone else, it was a piece of jewelry. To me, it was Exhibit C. The game was winding down, a lopsided victory for the home team. The mood was celebratory. My father, flushed with beer and victory, clapped his hands together. "All right, everyone, before you all head out, a family photo for the archives." This was a tradition, a required performance of happiness. Delia glided to his side, her arm looping through his. Her smile was radiant. "Yes, a wonderful idea. Gavin." Her eyes found me, a silent command to join them. I stood up, my movements measured. The photographer, a young man hired for the event, began arranging people, positioning my father and Delia in the center. As I moved to take my place on the periphery, I made a conscious calculation. I noted the position of the main floor lamp, the angle of the photographer's flash. Instead of standing straight on, I turned slightly, angling my body so the lamp's warm light would fall directly across the left side of my face, the side that was burning. I tilted my chin up just a fraction of a degree, enough to catch the light and eliminate any shadows. The photographer raised his camera. "Everyone smile." I smiled. It was a perfectly executed expression, devoid of any actual warmth. My eyes were fixed on the lens. Beside me, Delia's smile was equally brilliant, her steel bracelet gleaming under the flash. My father's arm was a heavy weight on her shoulder. Click, the flash went off. A brief, blinding burst of light that captured everything. The perfect smiles, the expensive clothes, the celebratory mood, and the distinct, angry red mark on my cheek, highlighted for posterity. No one said a word about it. No one asked if I was okay. They saw what they wanted to see. The Ryland family, united and triumphant, but the camera, a neutral observer, saw the truth. It recorded the data without bias. The image was now stored on a memory card, a digital record of a perfect family with a dark, ugly secret. I stepped away as the group broke apart, a low murmur of goodbyes filling the room. I walked over to the window, looking out at the dark, manicured lawn. All the evidence was collected, the physical sample, the digital logs, the audio file, the photographic record, the visual confirmation on her bracelet. Each piece was a link in a chain, a sentence in a report that was writing itself in my head. This was no longer just a personal injury. She had brought the company's dirty laundry into my father's home, and in doing so, had made the assault a corporate liability. She had threatened a director of the company. She had created a textbook case of workplace violence, even if the workplace was a kitchen in Arden Park. I watched Delia hand the photographer a generous tip, a final performance of magnanimity. She thought she had won. She thought the slap was the final word, a reassertion of her dominance. She was wrong. The slap wasn't the end of the game. It was the foul that stopped the clock. It was the moment that gave me possession of the ball, with a clear view of the end zone. In my mind, I pulled up a new file, the one I would begin assembling at 7 a.m., Monday morning. It needed a title, not Incident 73, something more appropriate, something that reflected the nexus of the corporate and the personal, the apathetic spectacle of the game and the cold reality of the business. I named the plan, Halftime Audit. The digital clock on my desktop flipped to 7:45 a.m. Monday morning, outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office in Stonebridge Tower. West Hexley was wrapped in a shroud of gray, early spring fog, blurring the lines of the buildings into a muted watercolor. Inside, the only sounds were the quiet hum of my workstation and the steady click of my keyboard. I put the finishing touches on the calendar invitation, my finger hovering over the mouse. The attendee list was precise. My father, Gavin Rylan, Delia Rylan, our chief legal officer, Marcus Thorne, the chief financial officer, Elizabeth Sato, and the two independent directors on our board, Arthur Pence and Eleanor Vance. It was the core of Meridian Freight's executive command. The subject line was sterile, a piece of corporate jargon designed to be both innocuous and non-negotiable. Urgent risk review, hospitality and sponsorship expenditures. I attached a single, password-protected PDF labeled Briefing Materials Q1. Then, I clicked Send. The invitation shot out into the digital ether, a silent, declarative act of war. Less than 3 minutes later, a reply landed in my inbox. It was from Delia. The message was, in her typical style, breezy and dismissive. Good morning, Maeve. A bit of an early start. This is all very important. Of course. But things are so hectic post-season. Can we table this until after the championship parade? Let's all catch our breath. Best, D. I read the email twice, savoring the casual attempt to deflect, to push my meticulously planned confrontation into the nebulous future. She was treating it like an inconvenient budget meeting, a bit of bureaucratic housekeeping to be postponed. My reply was drafted, sent, and delivered in under 30 seconds. Delia, compliance has no season. The meeting is at 9 a.m. as scheduled. See you there. I closed my laptop and stood. The battlefield was prepared. The 40th floor boardroom was a glass box suspended in the fog. It was Delia's favorite room, a place of power where she loved to hold court, with the city sprawling beneath her like a conquered territory. Today, the fog obscured the view, creating a sense of claustrophobic intimacy. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the cool, recessed lighting like a dark, still lake. I was the first to arrive. I connected my laptop to the room's main display, a massive 8K screen that covered most of the far wall. I entered my password, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a clean, elegant dashboard. It was the 6-month summary of all corporate spending coded to hospitality, sponsorship, and charitable donations. They filed in one by one. Elizabeth Sato, our CFO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, gave me a questioning look, but took her seat and opened her tablet. Marcus Thorne, our lawyer, looking perpetually worried, began arranging a neat stack of papers in front of him. The two independent directors, Pence and Vance, old-school corporate titans, nodded at me curtly. Then my father arrived, looking imposing in a perfectly tailored suit, his face a neutral mask. Finally, Delia swept in. A full minute late, dressed in a sharp cream-colored power suit, a stark contrast to the room's somber tones. She smiled brightly at everyone, a queen greeting her court. "All right, Maeve," my father said. his voice a low rumble that always commanded attention. "Let's get this over with. What's so urgent?" I didn't answer him directly. I simply used the mouse, my hand steady, and clicked on the largest graph on the screen. "Over the past 6 months," I began, my voice calm and even, devoid of emotion, "we've seen a significant spike in expenditures related to the Playbook Foundation, specifically, payments to 3 new vendors for event logistics and marketing consulting." The screen changed, now showing the names of 3 companies: Apex Strategic Solutions, Coastal Event Management, and Golden State Hospitality. Next to each name was a running total. The sum at the bottom of the screen was north of $2 million. "My department conducted a standard due diligence review," I continued, "and we found some anomalies." I clicked again. The screen now showed 3 columns. In the first were the company names. In the second, their registered corporate addresses. In the third, a satellite image pulled from a public database. The address for Apex Strategic Solutions was a crumbling, graffiti-covered warehouse in a derelict industrial park in Vernon. The image for Coastal Event Management showed a boarded-up storefront with a faded "For Lease" sign in its dusty window. The location for Golden State Hospitality was a barren, weed-choked vacant lot next to a freeway off-ramp. "These vendors are ghosts," I said, letting the words hang in the silent room. "The money flows from the Playbook Foundation, a registered charity funded by Meridian, into these shell corporations, and then it vanishes. The payments for these phantom services, I should note, perfectly coincide with the dates we finalize new shipping contracts with 3 of our largest overseas partners." A low murmur went through the room. Elizabeth Sato was staring at the screen, her face grim. My father's jaw was set like granite. Delia, however, looked merely annoyed. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice sharp. "This is a clerical error, a database mistake. I can have my team clear this up in an hour." "I'm sure you could try," I said, "but the financial trail is only the first item on the agenda." I minimized the dashboard. For a moment, the screen was black. Then, I opened a new file. An audio player appeared. "This next exhibit is from Sunday evening, during the Super Bowl party at your home. Gavin." The audio was captured by the kitchen's security sensor. I pressed play. The sound filled the room. First the muffled bass of the halftime show, and then, clearly, the sharp, ugly crack of a slap. It was followed by Delia's voice, low and venomous. "Like a little rat in the walls of this family, of this company, you are a loose end." The effect was galvanic. The air was sucked out of the room. Delia's face, which had been a mask of confident indignation, went bone white. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving 2 faint circles of rouge standing out like bruises. She looked as if she'd been struck herself. My father slammed his hand down on the table, the sound making everyone jump. "Enough! Turn it off. Maeve, this is a private family matter. This has no place in a boardroom." I stopped the audio file but did not close it. I turned to face him, my gaze level, my voice dropping to a cold, precise register. "You are incorrect, Chairman. This is a clear-cut case of workplace violence. A senior executive, co-CEO Delia Rylan, physically assaulted and verbally threatened a subordinate director. Myself, in a direct response to a line of questioning about corporate expenditures. The location is irrelevant. The act falls squarely under Meridian Policy 7.4, subsection B, Managerial Conduct and Workplace Safety. It is not a family matter. It is a corporate governance crisis." I gave him no time to respond. I clicked the mouse again. The audio player was replaced by a photograph. It was the picture I had taken in the bathroom, the UV light illuminating my own cheek. The glowing, greenish-yellow handprint was stark and ghostly against the darker background. "This is a photograph taken 20 minutes after the assault," I said. "The luminescence is from a forensic-grade UV dye, which I mixed into the hand soap in the guest bathroom prior to the party. The dye is invisible in normal light." I clicked again, bringing up a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the photo of my cheek. On the right was a zoomed-in image from the party photographer, A shot of Delia laughing, her right hand raised, the brushed steel bracelet on her wrist gleaming. I drew a red circle around the bracelet. The handprint is a perfect match for a right hand, and the dye residue was later visible on this very bracelet, which you were wearing all evening, Delia. Marcus Thorne, our lawyer, made a choking sound, a dry, rasping cough into his fist. Perhaps, he stammered, looking at my father, we should take a brief recess to discuss. This is insane. Delia's voice was high, brittle. She shot to her feet. It's a fabrication. All of it. She's manipulating data, creating fake evidence. She's been trying to undermine me for years. This is her pathetic attempt at a corporate coup. She laughed. A short, sharp, unconvincing bark. I met her wild-eyed gaze with a calm one of my own. I made one final click. The picture of my face vanished, replaced by a scanned document. It was a simple PDF, an invoice from Arden Park Premier Catering. The itemized list was long: chicken wings, chili, craft beer, the services of 2 bartenders and a photographer. It was the invoice for the Super Bowl party. This is the catering bill for the event, which was paid for out of the same Super Bowl marketing fund I questioned you about, Delia, a fund whose paper trail is, as of this morning, still missing. I zoomed in on the bottom of the page. There, on the signature line, was a flamboyant, confident signature. Delia Rylan. Your signature, authorizing the payment for the event where the assault took place and the funds were misappropriated. We have 16 years of your signature on file, from company reports to SEC filings. The match is perfect. It was the final, mundane piece of the puzzle, the bureaucratic link that tied the ghost companies, the assault, and the cover-up directly to her, in her own hand. Delia stared at her own signature, her mouth slightly agape. She had nothing left, no denial, no defense. Eleanor Vance, one of the independent directors, a woman known for her icy demeanor, spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of finality. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Pence and I would like to move into a closed session with Ms. Sato and Ms. Rylan, Maeve, that is, the rest of you will be excused. It was a dismissal, a clean, corporate execution. My father looked from Eleanor to me, his face a mixture of shock, fury, and something I hadn't seen in a long time, defeat. Delia sank back into her chair, her entire body seeming to deflate. They stood, my father and Delia and Marcus Thorne, and filed out of the room in silence. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind them. I remained in my seat. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt a strange, hollow calm. I turned and looked out the window. The fog was beginning to burn off, revealing the steel and glass canyons of the city below. From 40 floors up, the streets, the cars, the entire sprawling metropolis looked like a playing field, a vast and silent stadium after the game has been decided. The closed session with the independent directors lasted for 2 hours. I presented the data again, this time without interruption, walking them through the server logs from the Playbook Foundation, the encrypted payment authorizations, and the timeline of my compliance requests versus Delia's attempts at evasion. It was a forensic dissection, cold and methodical. When the glass door to the boardroom finally slid open, Delia was not waiting outside. She was gone, but her counterattack was already in motion. It wasn't a defense, it was an offensive blitz, a classic gaslighting campaign designed to seize and rewrite the narrative. By noon, the first press release hit the local business wire, issued by a high-priced crisis PR firm she must have had on retainer. It was a masterpiece of deflection. It spoke of a vicious internal dispute being brazenly exploited by a disgruntled family member. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It painted a picture of a personal, tragic conflict being twisted into baseless allegations against a respected CEO. The key phrases were designed to sting: malicious rumors, an unfortunate family dynamic, and a deeply regrettable attempt to settle a personal vendetta. It was a declaration that this was not about facts. It was about family drama, and I was the hysterical, vengeful stepdaughter. Simultaneously, her social media went active. A new post appeared on her highly curated Instagram account. It was the family photo from Sunday night. There we were, a portrait of manufactured happiness, and there I was, standing beside my father, smiling at the camera. She, or rather her PR team, had applied a subtle, smoothing filter to the image, one that softened the light, warmed the tones, and completely erased the angry red mark on my cheek. The caption was a masterclass in saccharine spin. Family is everything. We have our challenges, like everyone, but there is nothing that love and forgiveness can't heal. So grateful for my incredible family. The message was clear. Look at this photograph. Does this look like a victim? She's smiling. It's all a lie. The next level assault came at 1:15 p.m. An anonymous email, sent from a Proton, me address, landed in the inbox of every senior manager at Meridian Freight. The subject? The truth about the 40th floor. It was a poison pen letter, skillfully written to sound like a concerned, long-time employee. It accused me of erratic and ambitious behavior, of abusing my role in risk management, and of systematically manipulating financial data to frame a dedicated executive. It positioned me as a power-hungry usurper, willing to burn the company to the ground to seize control. The combination was a psychological tri-attack, the public denial, the visual proof of my supposed happiness, and the internal character assassination. It was designed to isolate me, to make me look unstable, vindictive, and dishonest from every possible angle. Then, at 2:15 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID simply read, Gavin Rylan. I let it ring 3 times before answering, stepping away from my desk to look out at the now clear city. Maeve, his voice was heavy, not with anger, but with a profound, weary disappointment that was, in many ways, far worse. Father, I said, my voice neutral. I've just read the press release. I've seen the emails. The board is in chaos. Our stock is going to take a hit. You have to stop this. Stop what? I asked. I didn't file the false vendor invoices. I didn't assault a subordinate. I didn't issue a press release. You are hurting the company, he said, the words heavy with accusation. This crusade, it's tearing Meridian apart. Whatever she did, whatever you think happened, this is not the way. You are airing our dirty laundry for the whole world to see. It has to be handled internally, quietly. You are hurting the company. Not Delia is hurting the company. I am the classic inversion. The whistleblower, not the criminal, is the source of the problem. A hot acid burn flared in my stomach, the familiar physical sensation of suppressed rage. For a single, dangerous second, I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to demand to know how he could have walked away from that kitchen, how he could value the image of unity over the fact of violence. But I didn't. The fire in my stomach was just fuel. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and reverted to my training. The noise was irrelevant. The gaslighting was just a tactic, a desperate defensive maneuver. My process was my armor. I remembered the simple mantra: evidence, sequence, witnesses. I have to go, I said, and hung up before he could reply. I sat back down at my desk. I ignored the 47 unread emails that had piled up. I ignored the blinking light on my desk phone. I opened a new file and began to type. It was an official, formal, workplace violence incident report, addressed directly to Maria Gonzalez, our head of human resources. I detailed the events of Sunday night in cold, emotionless, clinical language. I cited the exact time, the location, the nature of the assault, the specific threat made. I attached the audio file from the kitchen, the photograph of my cheek under UV light, and the screenshots of the security logs. I clicked Send. My next move was to open a new request form, this one addressed to building security. My presentation to the board had been comprehensive, but I had deliberately held one piece back. I requested all security footage and, more importantly, all audio recordings from the ground floor executive elevator lobby. From 7 o'clock a.m. to 9 o'clock a.m. that morning, Delia, in her arrogance, always forgot that the high-security corridors at Stonebridge Tower were equipped with sensitive, always-on microphones, a fact buried in the building's lease agreement that I, as risk director, had personally reviewed. I knew she had held a frantic, whispered conversation with her PR lead and Marcus Thorne in that very corridor before walking into the 9/8 meeting. I was betting she hadn't been careful with her words. The counter-offensive had been launched. Now, it was time to respond to theirs. At 3:30 p.m., an invitation arrived from Marcus Thorne. It was delicately worded. Delia's PR team had proposed a peace summit, a small, private reconciliation luncheon at Riverside, a high-end restaurant with glass walls. For the following day, they wanted to invite a journalist from the West Hexley Business Journal to show a united front and put these damaging rumors to rest. It was a trap, a public performance where I would be pressured to smile, to forgive, to validate the family challenges narrative she was spinning. I replied within 5 minutes, "Marcus, I am happy to attend. I agree that transparency is key." I paused, my fingers on the keyboard. However, given that the malicious rumors Delia's team refers to involve allegations of financial impropriety and personnel misconduct, I believe it's appropriate to have all the key stakeholders present to clear the air. Please extend the invitation to Elizabeth Sato, our CFO, David Renfro, our head of procurement, and of course, Maria Gonzalez, our head of HR. It will be a wonderful opportunity for us all to align. I'm sure Delia will agree. I sent the email. It was an escalation she couldn't refuse without looking like she was hiding something. I was calling her bluff, and I was bringing my witnesses. A confirmation came back an hour later. Delia had agreed. Of course she had. She was walking onto a stage she believed was hers, one she had built with spotlights and soft filters, ready to perform her greatest role, the magnanimous victim. She had no idea she was walking into an audit, and that the lights were about to be turned up to a harsh, unforgiving glare. The restaurant was called Glass House. It was a ridiculous name for a ridiculously pretentious place in the Riverside district, a cube of steel and glass cantilevered over the murky West Hexley River. The main selling point was the view. And today, the midday sun was relentless, pouring through the panoramic windows and making the polished concrete floor painfully bright. It was the kind of place Delia loved, a stage where everything and everyone was exposed. I arrived first and chose our table. It was in a semi-private alcove, but with a perfect, unobstructed view of a large, flat-screen television mounted on a far wall. As per the restaurant's usual ambiance, it was playing a silent loop of sports highlights. Fittingly, today's feature was the Super Bowl. I had a small, cube-shaped Pico projector with me, a piece of tech small enough to fit in my palm. When the maitre d' approached, I explained with a practiced corporate smile that I had a quick, informal presentation for my colleagues. I asked if it would be possible to patch my device into their television. A generous tip and the assurance that it would be very brief made it possible. I handed the projector and a thumb drive to a waiter, pointing to the television. "Could you please switch the input to this at exactly 12:45 p.m.? Not before," he nodded, pocketing the cash. The stage was set. My guests arrived in a carefully orchestrated sequence. First, Elizabeth Sato, CFO, David Renfro, Procurement, and Maria Gonzalez, HR, my witnesses, my jury. They looked uncomfortable, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and dread. Then my father appeared, his face set like stone. Finally, Delia made her entrance, accompanied by the journalist, a slick young man named Leo from the Business Journal. Delia was a vision in white linen, radiating a serene, victimized grace. She was here to be vindicated, and she was playing the part to perfection. We ordered salads and sparkling water, the conversation stilted and painfully polite. On the wall, the silent, looping highlights played on. A spectacular catch, a bone-jarring tackle, the triumphant raising of the trophy. It was a pantomime of conflict and resolution, a backdrop to our own silent war. At precisely 12:43 p.m., Delia placed her fork down, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and cleared her throat. The performance began. She cast a look of profound, patronizing sympathy in my direction. "I'm so glad we could all come together today," she began, her voice soft and reasonable. "Leo, thank you for being here. I think it's important to be transparent. There have been rumors, and I want to be the first to say that this is a family matter that has unfortunately spilled into our professional lives." She looked around the table, her gaze lingering on Maria and Elizabeth. "Maeve," she said, her voice dropping into a register of gentle concern, "is going through a difficult time in her new role. The pressure can be immense, and sometimes, when we're under that kind of stress, we can misinterpret things. We can lash out. We just want everyone to know that she has our full support and understanding as she navigates these challenges." It was a masterstroke of gaslighting. In a few sentences, she had framed me as unstable, incompetent, and delusional, all while positioning herself as the patient, long-suffering matriarch. She was painting a picture of my professional failure, and the journalist was eating it up, his pen scratching quietly in his notebook. I didn't say a word. I just glanced at my watch, 12:45 p.m. As if on cue, the image on the large television screen flickered. The looping highlights of the Super Bowl vanished. For a second, the screen was blue. Then, a new video began to play. The image was grainy, shot from a high, fixed angle. It showed a familiar, sterile corridor, the executive elevator lobby at Stonebridge Tower. The timestamp in the corner read 8:52 a.m. Monday. The audio was low, full of ambient hiss, but the voices were discernible. Delia's voice, sharp and frantic. "Have to kill this. Marcus, bury it in legal. Call it a family dispute. Call her unstable. I don't care. Just make it go away." On the screen, the silent, captured image of Delia was pulling at my arm. Her face contorted with a fury that was anything but sympathetic. She was dragging the on-screen me toward a door. The door to the kitchen. The video had no audio of the slap itself, only the visual prelude, the aggression, the force, the clear intent. The silent movie of her dragging me off-screen was more damning than any sound. The effect on the table was instantaneous and absolute, a collective intake of breath. The quiet clinking of forks and knives on plates stopped. Dead silence descended, a vacuum in the sun-drenched restaurant. The journalist, Leo, stared at the screen, his pen frozen halfway to his mouth, his jaw slack. My father's face was ashen. Delia stared, horrified, at her own image on the screen. "What is this? What have you done?" she whispered, her voice a strangled rasp. I didn't answer. I simply brought my own tablet to life, its screen mirroring to the television. The security footage was replaced by a familiar chart, the 3 ghost vendors, the flow of money from the Playbook Foundation, the addresses of the derelict warehouses. "This is the professional pressure I've been under." "Delia," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. "Investigating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme you've been running for the past 6 months." I swiped the screen. A new document appeared. It was an email chain. "And this is an email you sent to your contact at Apex Strategic Solutions, accidentally forwarding the entire thread to our chief of procurement last month. The thread in which you explicitly discuss rerouting the standard invoice process to avoid compliance flags. You called it taking the scenic route." David Renfro, head of procurement, who had been sitting in stunned silence, slowly pushed his chair back. He looked at Delia, then at my father, his face a mask of dawning comprehension and disgust. The atmosphere in the alcove had become toxic, the air thick with betrayal, but I wasn't finished. I nodded to Maria Gonzalez. She didn't need any prompting. She opened a slim leather portfolio that had been resting on her lap. Her voice, when she spoke, was devoid of emotion, the practiced tone of an HR professional reading from a report. In the past fiscal year, she began, not looking at anyone in particular, my office has received two separate, anonymous complaints filed through our whistleblower portal regarding co-CEO Delia Rylan. Both complaints detail a pattern of verbal harassment, intimidation, and threats of professional retaliation against junior staff in the marketing and events departments. Due to the anonymous nature and lack of corroborating evidence at the time, the investigation was stalled, until now. Every word was a nail in the coffin: the financial fraud, the physical assault, the history of verbal abuse, the carefully constructed brand of Delia Rylan. The charitable, family-oriented leader was being systematically dismantled in the bright, unforgiving light of a Tuesday lunch. My father finally broke his silence. He put his fork and knife down on his plate with a soft, final clink. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, desperate plea. Then he looked at the shocked faces of his executives and the journalist. "Stop this," he said, his voice low and ragged. "Maeve, stop it, now." Delia seized on his intervention, a drowning woman grasping at a piece of driftwood. "Yes," she said, her voice rising, becoming shrill. "It's a setup, all of it. The video is edited. The emails are forged. She's been planning this. It's all just a pathetic, staged performance." Her denial was wild, unconvincing, but it was the only play she had left. I looked at her, then let my gaze sweep across the table, meeting the eyes of each person there. I let the silence stretch for a long, painful moment. Then, with a final, deliberate tap on my tablet, I made the last move. The screen on the wall changed one last time. It was now filled with a single, stark image, a close-up photograph, bathed in an eerie, purplish-blue light. It was the picture of my own cheek, taken in the bathroom on Sunday night, and on it, glowing with a malevolent, greenish-yellow light, was the unmistakable, perfectly rendered print of a hand. "Does this look staged to you, Delia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the profound silence of the table. The show was over. The return to Stonebridge Tower felt like ascending to the summit of a storm cloud. The hastily convened emergency session of the Board of Directors was scheduled for 3:00 p.m. The mood in the 40th floor boardroom was funereal. The bright sunlight of the disastrous lunch had been replaced by the flat, shadowless light of a late afternoon sky. This time, there was a new face at the table, a stern, gray-haired woman named Catherine Cole, a partner from an external law firm specializing in corporate governance, brought in as independent counsel. Her presence changed the entire dynamic of the room. This was no longer a family squabble or an internal power play. This was a formal proceeding. My father and Delia sat at one end of the table, a frozen tableau of fury and shock. The other board members were spaced out, their faces grim, avoiding eye contact. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, opened my laptop, and connected to the main screen. I had been given exactly 15 minutes. I used 12. I began without preamble, my voice a flat monotone. There were no adjectives, no accusations, no narrative. My presentation was a clinical cascade of data. A timeline appeared on the screen, a single, sharp line moving from left to right. Clicks of the mouse were the only sounds I made. Click, a note appeared on the timeline. Q4, Establishment of Apex Strategic Solutions, Registered Agent, Michael Corbin. Click, a photograph of Michael Corbin appeared. Mr. Corbin is Delia Rylan's younger brother. Click, a new document. Contract signed between Playbook Foundation and Apex Strategic Solutions. Service, marketing consulting. Value, $450,000. Authorized by Delia Rylan. Click, arrows appeared. Red lines tracing the flow of money from Meridian's accounts to the foundation. Then from the foundation to Apex. Another arrow showed the money moving from Apex to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Click, the screen split, showing 6 such contracts. 6 arrows, 6 identical pathways for 6 different shell corporations, all linked back to associates or family members of Delia. The total was a stark, ugly number at the bottom of the screen. I moved on. The financial data vanished, replaced by a simple floor plan of my father's house. A red dot pulsed in the kitchen. Click. Super Bowl event, 1943-02. Audio anomaly logged by security system. The sound file played again. The sharp crack. The hissed threat. Click. The UV photograph of my cheek filled the screen. A glowing handprint. Click. An HR file appeared. Policy 7.4. Workplace safety. Any act of physical violence or credible threat of violence by a manager against any employee will result in immediate suspension pending a full investigation. I didn't look at Delia. I didn't look at my father. I looked at the screen, at the cold, hard facts I had assembled. My presentation was not an argument, it was an autopsy. I finished with the scanned image of Delia's signature on the catering invoice, the final link in the chain. Then, I sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. Catherine Cole, the independent counsel, was the first to speak. She adjusted her glasses and looked at a document in front of her. Her voice was as dry as old paper. "The policy is clear," she stated, looking at the board members. Policy 7.4 is a zero-tolerance clause. The evidence presented, particularly the audio recording and the corroborating security logs, triggers this clause by default. The board is obligated to act. Delia finally found her voice. It was tight, strained. "This is a rush to judgment, a procedural ambush. I demand a postponement. I need time to consult with my own legal counsel, to prepare a formal response to these slanderous allegations." Marcus Thorne, our chief legal officer and a man hopelessly loyal to my father, cleared his throat. "A request for a postponement is not unreasonable, given the gravity of the—" He was cut off by Ms. Cole. "Ordinarily, I might agree," she said, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "However, there is another complicating factor." She slid a file across the table. "This is a copy of the contract signed last week between Meridian Freight's logistics division and a new trucking subcontractor, Corbin Trucking LLC. The principal of this LLC is, again, Michael Corbin, Ms. Ryland's brother. The contract was fast-tracked for approval by Ms. Ryland herself, bypassing the standard procurement review process headed by Mr. Renfro." She paused, letting the information sink in. "This creates a significant spousal conflict of interest issue, as Chairman Ryland is a party to both the family relationship and the corporate structure. Continuing to allow Ms. Ryland to exercise executive authority while this conflict is unresolved, in addition to the Policy 7.4 violation, exposes the company and this board to significant legal and financial liability." It was a checkmate. She had used Delia's own corrupt dealings to neutralize her ability to delay the consequences of her violence. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a slim-bound report. I passed a copy to each board member. "For the record," I said quietly, "this is the certified report from a third-party forensic document examiner. It confirms the signature on all 6 of the fraudulent marketing contracts is a definitive match to the authenticated signature samples of co-CEO Delia Ryland." Delia slumped in her chair, a final, imperceptible exhalation of defeat. I looked at my father. He wasn't looking at me, or at his wife. He was staring past them all, at the far glass wall of the boardroom. Etched into the glass was the large, elegant M of the Meridian Freight logo. For years, that logo had been his entire world, the symbol of his power, his legacy. Now, he was watching it become the symbol of his failure. I saw his hand, resting on the mahogany table, begin to tremble, a slight but uncontrollable tremor. He finally understood. The game was over. The playbook he had always relied on, of denial, of smoothing things over, of prioritizing image over reality, was useless. The rules had changed, and he no longer controlled the board. Eleanor Vance, the senior independent director, called the question. "A motion is on the floor to place co-CEO Delia Ryland on immediate indefinite suspension." pending the outcome of a full, independent forensic audit of the Playbook Foundation and all related entities. All in favor? Eleanor's hand went up. Arthur Pence's hand went up. Two other directors, a man from the banking sector and a woman from tech, raised their hands, 4 in favor. All opposed? Slowly, my father's hand went up. His face was a mask of gray concrete. Beside him, Delia raised her own hand, an act of defiant self-preservation. 2 against. Abstentions? One hand went up, a longtime board member, a man who owed his entire career to my father. Couldn't bring himself to vote against him, but couldn't in good conscience vote for him either. 1 abstention. The motion carries, Eleanor announced, her voice devoid of triumph. 4-2, with 1 abstention. Delia Rylan is hereby suspended. Effective immediately, a formal resolution will be drafted by council. She turned her icy gaze on Delia. You will be required to surrender all company property, your laptop, your phone, and your access credentials, to building security before you leave the premises. The finality of it was brutal. She was no longer a CEO. She was a security risk. The tension in the room broke. People began to shift, to murmur, to gather their papers. The drama was over. Now came the dreary procedural aftermath. I ignored it all. I reached forward and closed the lid of my laptop. The soft click was the only sound in my immediate world. Across the room, someone pushed their chair back from the table. The sound of the wood scraping against the polished stone floor was sharp. Loud in the suddenly quiet space, it sounded like the first, heavy drops of rain before a storm. The boardroom had emptied, but the stale air of its conclusion clung to us. The motion had passed. The vote was recorded. Yet, the finality of it all was suspended, hanging in the dead quiet of the executive anteroom just outside the glass doors. It was a holding pen, designed with expensive art and plush, low-slung sofas to feel like a lounge, but it was a cage. My father, Delia, and Marcus Thorne were in that cage. I had been asked to remain with Eleanor Vance and Catherine Cole, the independent counsel, inside the boardroom as they drafted the immediate, formal notice of suspension and the resolution for the forensic audit. Through the glass, I could see them. My father sat heavily in a designer chair, his posture broken, staring at his own hands as if they were foreign objects. Marcus Thorne was speaking quietly, urgently, into his own phone, his back to the room. And Delia was pacing. She was a panther who had found the bars of her enclosure. She prowled the length of the glass wall, her company-issued phone clamped to her ear. Her movements were no longer fluid and elegant. They were sharp, feral, and full of a furious, crackling energy. She was vibrating with a rage that had nowhere to go. She was speaking in a low, vicious hiss, a voice I remembered well from the kitchen. I was watching her, but my attention was on the paperwork Catherine Cole was signing, when my own company phone, resting on the mahogany table, gave a single, silent vibration. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a high-priority notification from my own risk management dashboard, a system I had designed. Alert. S-Zone audio flag device, 1002, D.R. Rylan. Location, 40F anteroom keywords, container. Expose. Port tax. Label. Status, logged, secure File, 7749. My blood went cold. The 40th floor was a designated secure zone, a fact clearly stated in every executive's employment contract, to prevent corporate espionage. All calls made on company-issued devices within this zone were automatically recorded, encrypted, and scanned by an algorithm for sensitive keywords. Delia, in her blind fury, had forgotten. I tapped the alert. The file was already on my server. I lifted my phone, not to my ear, but just high enough to listen, keeping the volume low. Her voice, thin and digitized, filled my head. He just sat there. He let that bitch Destroy me. He didn't say a word. After everything I did for him, for this company. Fine, if he won't back me, if he's going to let me take the fall for this, I'll burn him to the ground. I'll tell them everything about that container shipment from last week. I'll tell them he was the one who ordered the change to the bills of lading. I'll tell them all about how we mislabeled the contents to evade the new port tariffs. He wants a war? He'll get one. She had just confessed to a federal crime, and in a desperate attempt to save herself, she had just implicated the chairman of the board, my father. Catherine Cole looked up, noticing my focus. Ms. Rylan, is there a problem? I lowered the phone, my face impassive. There is one final piece of evidence, I said, my voice quiet. I believe it just became available. I stood up and walked the 10 steps to the glass doors, pushing one open. The 3 of them looked up as I entered the anteroom. The air was thick with their shared panic. Delia snapped her phone shut, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure hatred. "What do you want?" she spat. I didn't answer her. I didn't look at her. I walked to the low glass coffee table in the center of their seating arrangement. Slowly, deliberately. I placed my own black phone on the glass surface. The slight click of it touching the table was unnaturally loud in the silence. "You really should have read the IT policies." "Delia," I said, my voice conversational. "The 40th floor is a secure zone. The protocol is always active." I tapped the screen of my phone. The audio file I had just been listening to was queued up, its waveform visible. The compliance server monitors and records all calls made on company devices in this area. It flags certain keywords. I looked up, finally meeting her gaze. Keywords like container, port tax, and bills of lading. Your last call was automatically logged as evidence. The internal investigation team, which now reports to the independent directors, has been notified. For a second, she didn't understand. She just stared at the phone. Then, the blood drained from her face, a wave of sickening comprehension washing over her. She lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a pure, animal instinct. She dove for the phone on the table, her hands grasping. I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. Before her fingers could touch it, the main elevator doors behind her whooshed open. 2 uniformed security officers, large, impassive men I had personally hired, stepped out. They had been summoned by Catherine Cole the moment the vote had passed. Delia froze, her hand hovering over the phone. Her breath was coming in ragged gasps. She looked from the phone to the security guards, and then, finally, to my father. Her face crumpled, not in sadness, but in a terrible, final rage. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You did this! You let her do this to me! You owe me! Gavin, you owe me! I did it for you! That container was your problem! You told me to fix it!" My father shrank under the assault, his face gray. He looked small, a hollowed-out version of the titan he had always pretended to be. He wouldn't look at his wife. He wouldn't look at the security guards. He looked at me. His eyes were pleading, desperate. "Maeve," he whispered, the sound barely audible. "Maeve, I'm sorry." I just stared back at him. I said nothing. An apology is just an attempt to rebalance a personal ledger, a way to make the speaker feel better. It doesn't adjust the corporate balance sheet. It doesn't erase the fraud or the felony. It doesn't unwind the crime. It's just air, a sound. It had no value in this equation. Only the next decision mattered. The glass door from the boardroom opened again. Catherine Cole stepped out, holding a single, folded document, Marcus Thorne, who had been watching this all unfold with a look of abject horror, stepped forward as if to intercept her. She simply bypassed him and walked directly to Delia. "Ms. Rylan," she said, her voice crisp and final. "This is a formal notice of your immediate and indefinite suspension from Meridian Freight and all its subsidiaries. You are to be escorted from the building. Your access is revoked." She handed the paper to Delia. Delia just stared at it, her chest heaving. She didn't take it. The paper fluttered from Catherine's hand, and landed on the floor between them. Delia let out a sound, a choked, guttural sob of pure fury. She looked down at her own wrist. She was wearing the same brushed steel bracelet she had worn at the party, the bracelet that had collected the residue of the buffalo sauce and the UV dye. With a violent, twisting motion, she unclasped it and threw it to the ground. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, metallic clatter, skittering to a stop near my feet. "You can have it all," she screamed at me. "You've won. I hope you choke on it." The security men stepped forward, each taking one of her arms. She didn't fight. She just went limp, her entire body rigid with hate. As they guided her toward the elevator, everyone watched her go. My father, Marcus, Catherine Cole. I did not. My gaze was fixed on the object on the floor. I crouched down, ignoring the stunned silence of the room. I looked at the bracelet. Even in the artificial light, I could see it. A faint, dull tarnish on the brushed steel. A lo-fi, invisible to the naked eye stain of old sauce and chemical dye. The perfect physical link between the executive and the animal. I reached into the briefcase I had set by my chair. From an inside pocket, I withdrew a clear plastic evidence bag, pre-labeled with a case number from my private files. I unfolded it, opened the Ziploc seal, and, with 2 fingers, picked up the steel bracelet. I dropped it into the bag. It landed with a soft, muffled sound. I zipped the bag shut, the sound of the plastic teeth interlocking a neat, clean, definitive zip. It was done. The boardroom emptied with a grim, funereal quiet. It was not a celebratory exit. The directors filed out one by one, their briefcases snapping shut with a sound like muffled reports. They offered curt, professional nods to Catherine Cole. They offered nothing to me. They actively avoided looking at my father. He was a non-entity now, a ghost at his own execution, left behind with the wreckage. The heavy glass door slid closed with a pressurized sigh, sealing the 3 of us inside. Me, my father, and Catherine Cole, who represented the new, unblinking reality of corporate law. The silence that descended was heavier than the silence that had preceded the vote. This was the silence of the aftermath, thick with the residue of what had just been done. The faint, chemical smell of the whiteboard cleaner used hours ago seemed to re-emerge, a sterile, sharp scent. Catherine Cole sat at the head of the table. She was the only one who seemed unaffected. She was procedure incarnate. She slid a single document from a slim file and placed it squarely in the center of the mahogany table, between me and my father. "The board's resolution is effective immediately," she stated, her voice cutting through the stillness. "The audit has been approved, and this requires your signature, Ms. Rylan." I looked at the paper. It was a single page. My eyes scanned the legalese, the whereas and therefore clauses, until they landed on the operative phrase, typed in bold. Appointment, Interim Chief Executive Officer. Below it, a blank line waited next to my typed name, Maeve Rylan. I stared at the title. It was not a trophy. It was not a prize. It was exactly what the outline had described in my own head. A function, a title to navigate a crisis. I was not the new queen. I was the director of risk management, and the entire company had just become the ultimate risk scenario. This was not a coronation. It was a containment protocol. "The independent directors have full confidence in your ability to stabilize the company and oversee the forensic audit," Catherine said, as if reading from a script. She pushed a pen across the table. It was heavy, black, and minimalist. I reached for the pen. My father made a sound, a low, guttural noise, like a man trying to speak after a long illness. "Maeve." I didn't look at him. I picked up the pen. The metal was cold against my fingers. I spun it once, finding the right grip. I uncapped it. The small click was definitive. I positioned the tip over the signature line. "Maeve, please," he tried again. His voice was raw, broken. "We need to talk about the family." My hand did not shake. I lowered the pen to the paper, the nib, saturated with black ink, touched the fibers. I began to sign. M. Rylan, not Maeve. The signature was clean, precise, economical. It was the same signature I used on compliance reports and SEC filings. I watched the ink settle into the heavy bond paper. It was dark, absolute. It absorbed into the fibers, spreading just slightly at the edges, like rain hitting dry turf after a brutal game. The metaphor from my playbook, realized. I put the cap back on the pen. Another click. I pushed the signed document, and the pen, back toward Catherine Cole. Only then did I turn my head and look at my father. He looked old, not just tired, but ancient, the power that had defined him, the sheer gravitational force of his certainty, was gone. He was just a man in an expensive suit, his face gray, his eyes hollow and pleading. He was trying to appeal to a set of rules I no longer played by. "This isn't about us, Father," I said. My voice was low and flat. It held no anger, no pity, and no lingering affection. It was the voice I used for audits. "This is about the company. You blurred the line. I am drawing it again." "But family," he whispered, the words sounding obscene in this room, at this moment. "Meridian first," I cut him off, the words sharp and final. "The rest, later, or maybe not at all. That is your decision. This one is mine." His face crumpled. That was the blow, not the vote, not the suspension of his wife. This, the final, clinical severance. He understood that the daughter he had ignored, the daughter he had allowed to be struck, was now gone. In her place was this entity, who saw him only as a liability on a balance sheet. I turned away from him. It was a complete dismissal. I turned back to the table, opened my own laptop. The screen flared to life. My password was 24 characters long, a mix of alphanumeric code that I typed in under 3 seconds. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened a new email. To all staff at Meridian Freight. Board of Directors. Subject, a note from the interim CEO. The message was brief. It was precise. It was cold. Effective immediately. I have been appointed interim CEO of Meridian Freight. Delia Rylan has been suspended indefinitely, pending a full forensic audit of the Playbook Foundation and all related accounts. Our work continues. To that end, 2 things are happening. An independent, third-party firm will begin a comprehensive audit of all hospitality, marketing, and charitable expenditures from the last 24 months. I expect full cooperation from all departments. A new, fully anonymous whistleblower hotline is being activated, managed by an external vendor. The link will be on the company intranet within the hour. Use it. Meridian is a great company. It is built on the integrity of its logistics and the hard work of its employees. I will not allow that integrity to be compromised. We will be transparent, we will be thorough, and we will move forward. M. Rylan, Interim CEO. My finger hovered over the send button. In the hallway, I heard the faint ding of the service elevator, the one used for catering and freight and, now, for disgraced executives. I didn't have to look. I could see the reflection in the dark glass of the boardroom wall. 2 security guards, a woman in a cream-colored suit, her shoulders slumped. The doors slid closed, the line of light narrowing to nothing. The final whistle. I clicked send. The email was gone. The new reality was set. Outside the window, the gray sky, which had threatened all afternoon, finally broke. A light rain began to fall, streaking the glass, blurring the hard edges of West Hexley. The city below, which had been a frantic snarl of traffic and noise, seemed to grow quiet, hushed by the weather. It was the silence after a detonation, the quiet after the fireworks. I closed my laptop. Catherine Cole was gathering her papers, placing the signed appointment into her briefcase. My father was still sitting there, a statue of a forgotten man. I stood up. My legs felt steady. I walked to the glass wall and looked out at the rain. I saw my own reflection superimposed over the city and the falling water. I saw the etched Meridian logo, glowing faintly in the dimming light, right over my own heart. I felt nothing. Not triumph, not joy, not the hot, acidic satisfaction of revenge. I had expected a rush, a surge of power. Instead, there was just an absence. The absence of pressure. The absence of the long, grinding weight I had been carrying for years. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt light. This wasn't a victory lap. There would be no celebrations, no gloating. The game was simply over. There was no need for a rematch, no need for further punishment. The order had been restored. The books would be balanced. The violence had been answered with procedure. No overtime. The match ends here. I turned from the window. My father hadn't moved. Catherine Cole was already at the door. I walked to the light switch panel by the entrance. My hand found the switch. I turned off the lights, plunging the room, and my father, into the shadows. I stepped out of the shadowed boardroom and back into the cool, fluorescent light of the 40th floor corridor. The world outside the glass box was a tableau of suspended animation. A few senior VPs and executive assistants, who had clearly been waiting, were frozen in place, pretending to be engrossed in their tablets or conversations. As I walked past, their activity ceased. They looked up, their faces a carefully neutral blend of fear and a new, startling deference. They didn't smile. They didn't offer congratulations. They simply nodded. Slow, deliberate, respectful nods. They were acknowledging a shift in the magnetic poles of their universe. The power had moved. I walked the long, silent corridor toward the main elevator bank. My footsteps on the polished marble were the only sound, a steady, rhythmic cadence against the low hum of the building's climate control. Each step felt measured, final. I was walking away from a battlefield where the last shot had been fired, leaving the casualties behind in the dark. My phone, clutched in my hand, vibrated. It was not a single buzz, but a series of them, a cascade of notifications that were the digital aftershocks of the boardroom earthquake. I glanced at the screen as I walked. A system-generated email from HR. Status. Update. Employee 1002. Rylan Delia. Status changed to suspended. Access level 0. A calendar invitation from Catherine Cole. Kickoff. Independent Forensic Audit. Wednesday, 9:00 a.m. A confirmation receipt from the external vendor for the whistleblower hotline, showing the system was now live and active across the entire company network. It was the cold, impersonal language of consequences, a life's work, a position of power, an entire persona, all reduced to a single word: suspended. Access level 0. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a death certificate. There was no emotion in it, no judgment. It was just data. The system had been corrected. I reached the elevator bank. The polished brass doors reflected a distorted, elongated version of me. I looked different, not physically, but the space I occupied in the world felt different, larger, denser. I stopped, not yet calling the elevator, and unholstered my personal phone. I opened a new text message. The recipient was Gavin Rylan. He was no longer father in my contacts. The change had been made weeks ago. My thumbs moved quickly, composing a message that was as brief and as cold as the corporate emails now flooding the server. No party tonight, just policy. I hit send without a moment's hesitation. It was not a message of anger or spite. It was a statement of new terms. The blurry, uncomfortable world of family gatherings where business was discussed in whispers and conflicts were papered over with strained smiles was gone. From now on, there would be the company, and there would be the family. The two would never again occupy the same space. He had forced me to draw a line, and now I had drawn it in steel. I put the phone away and pressed the call button. The arrow above the doors lit up, a soft, golden chevron pointing down. While I waited, I looked at my reflection in the polished doors. It was a clearer image now that I was standing still. I saw a woman in a severe, dark business suit. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. I looked at my cheek, the left one, the faint, angry red bloom from Sunday night, which had become a yellowish-purple bruise by Monday, was now almost gone. It was just a faint, shadowy discoloration, a ghost of the violence that had set all of this in motion. It would be completely invisible by tomorrow. The evidence was fading from my skin, but it was now permanently etched into the corporate record. The elevator arrived with a soft, nearly silent ding. The brass doors slid open, revealing an empty wood-paneled car. I stepped inside. The doors began to close, a slow, inexorable meeting of polished metal. In the final inches before they shut, I caught my own eye in the reflection. I mouthed the words to myself, a silent, personal mantra. My lips formed the shape, but no sound escaped. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. The final entry in the logbook of this engagement. No overtime. The doors sealed with a soft, definitive thud. The car began its silent, rapid descent. The numbers above the door lit up in reverse order, 39, 38, 37. My victory didn't need a parade. It didn't require a gloating speech or a final, cinematic confrontation. That was Delia's world. A world of performance and spectacle. My world was the world of systems, of actions and consequences, of causes and effects. The punishment was not an act of personal vengeance. The punishment was the logical, unavoidable outcome of her own choices. She had broken the rules of the system, and the system, with my guidance, had simply corrected the error. She was not a villain I had vanquished. She was a variable that had been rendered null. There was no need for further explanation. The facts, laid bare in the sterile light of the boardroom, spoke for themselves. The narrative was now fixed, immutable, logged in servers and meeting minutes. Any attempt to add a postscript, an emotional summary, would only dilute its power. The story was over. The win was not the feeling of her fall. The win was the feeling of order returning. It was the clean, quiet satisfaction of a complex equation being solved, of a corrupted line of code being deleted, of a crooked picture being set straight on the wall. It was the restoration of balance. That was all I had ever wanted. Not revenge, just for the numbers to add up correctly. The elevator slowed, its descent smooth and controlled. The final number lit up. G. The doors slid open to the vast, echoing marble lobby of Stonebridge Tower. The workday was over. The building was emptying out. I stepped out of the elevator and joined the quiet, anonymous flow of people heading for the doors. Just another executive heading home. The game was over. The board was reset. And tomorrow, a new one would begin. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. And if you'd like to give it an extra boost, hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.